Serafina opens her eyes in a dimly lit room, finding her neck and hands bound by heavy iron chains. She looks around the small space and realizes she is confined within the cold stone walls of a prison cell. Touching the collar round her neck, she realizes she has been taken prisoner after a crushing defeat against the barbarians. In 1342, two massive armies clashed in the barbarian territory, meeting in the middle of a vast desert. The Eldoran rifle squad maintains their fire, but the aggressive barbarian onslaught causes their front lines to fall into disarray. As their captain, Serafina shouts to boost her troops' morale and orders them to change formations to hold their ground. Serafina takes down many enemies, but seeing so many of her soldiers fallen, she begins to doubt she can bring the survivors home. The situation turns dire when a man in black armor named Vior arrives and begins slaughtering the Eldoran knights without mercy. Vior stands tall before Serafina, his large blade stained with the blood of her fallen comrades. Recognizing her as a general, Vior challenges Serafina to a duel, having grown bored of fighting ordinary soldiers. Serafina accepts the challenge and charges forward with all her might, prepared to die for her homeland. The two engage in a fierce exchange of blows, their weapons clashing repeatedly in a display of strength. Vior's power proves far superior. Eventually, Serafina's sword shatters and her helmet falls to the ground in pieces. Instead of killing her as she kneels in resignation, Vior decides to capture Serafina alive, claiming she has other uses. Recalling this, Serafina begins to tremble, fearing she will be used only to satisfy the barbarian's lust. She rolls across the cell floor in distress, unable to accept the shame of her current captivity. She feels deeply humiliated as a noble and remains burdened by guilt over the uncertain fate of her troops. Locked in a dark cell, Serafina de la Villain thinks of her scattered troops after their defeat. She strikes the stone wall in frustration. She feels she has failed her duties as a noble. She was unable to protect her people, whose wheat fields are now devastated by a severe drought. Kneeling in the dim light of her cell, Serafina reflects on the misfortune that has befallen both her and her kingdom. The sound of footsteps approaches, and a visitor enters the cell. Serafina looks up in surprise as she realizes she is no longer alone. A young woman named Setsui stands before her. She introduces herself as a servant to the man who captured Serafina on the battlefield. Serafina grows suspicious as Setsui approaches a mechanism on the wall. She fears the servant has come to torture her for military information. Setsui pulls a lever on the wall to activate the mechanism. The chains tighten, lifting Serafina's hands and leaving her hanging against the stone wall. Setsui watches her prisoner carefully. She explains that the restraints are necessary to ensure Serafina remains still for what comes next. Elsewhere, the warrior Viora grows impatient to see his captive. He smiles as he refers to Serafina as his new treasure. Serafina is left confused and humiliated as her captor begins to clean her. She cannot understand the reason for such unexpected treatment. Setsui carefully wrings out a cloth after washing away the bloodstains. She wants to ensure Serafina looks presentable for her master. Setsui comments on Serafina's feminine appearance while cleaning her. Serafina turns away, feeling her pride as a knight is being ignored. Setsui pulls a large metal tool from her basket. Seeing the object, Serafina's eyes widen in fear as she believes her life is about to end. The shackles are removed, and Serafina is prepared for a change. Setsui begins to dress her in a long blue gown and ornaments her hair with ribbons. Now dressed in a gown, Serafina notices the scent of perfume on her skin. She is baffled that she is being treated this way instead of being interrogated. Suddenly, the ceiling begins to vibrate and dust falls from above. Setsui and Serafina look up, sensing the arrival of someone powerful. The cell door opens to reveal a man in heavy armor and a fur cloak. Serafina stares at the imposing figure who has finally come to see her. Hearing his name, Serafina recalls the stories her grandfather once told her. She begins to realize that the old legends about this man are true. Serafina suppresses her anger while staring at the armored man standing before her. She stands up and introduces herself as a daughter of the Levilant family, ready to face her fate without begging for mercy. Despite the tense situation, she remains firm while the man and a young girl observe her from within the cell. The man is confused when Serafina mentions being a sacrifice. He clarifies that his true intention in bringing her there is to make her his bride. Stunned by his words, Serafina holds her head and screams in disbelief at the sudden proposal. Serafina panics, suspecting his words are merely a deceptive tactic for a ritual. However, the man remains composed, feeling that marrying a former enemy is not an issue at all. He explains that his clan has a long-standing tradition of taking formidable female knights as wives. This unusual logic leaves Serafina completely stunned. The man reminds her of her own words that he could do as he pleased with her. He admits he has been interested in her since seeing her skill with a sword. To him, Serafina's fighting style appeared honest and direct. He goes as far as to openly confess that he fell in love with her at first sight. Before departing, the man promises not to force her into anything. He leaves Serafina standing frozen behind the bars, caught off guard by the unexpected proposal. The story shifts to a flashback in the kingdom of Ilderin. Serafina's brother, Sidious, informs her of the king's orders for an eastern expedition and officially appoints her as a knight captain. Along with her military duties, Sidious presents a party invitation from Countess Ildel. He wants Serafina to attend the formal event as a lady rather than as a knight. As news of the eastern expedition spreads through the city market, Serafina prepares herself. She soon departs for the ballroom in her family's carriage. Serafina arrives wearing an elegant pink gown, appearing quite different from her usual self. However, her presence draws whispers from nobles who doubt her ability to lead troops. Feeling out of place, Serafina retreats to the balcony for some solitude. Before long, a group of noblewomen approaches her to ask about the dangers of the eastern region. Serafina is hanging out with two friends at a gazebo late at night. They are talking about rumors of monsters and dragons that supposedly live in the eastern region. Serafina just smiles, thinking it's all just a fairy tale. However, her friends start scaring her with stories about barbarians who kidnap female knights to be used as sacrifices. Unable to take it anymore, Serafina slams the table. She says she is proud to be a knight for the sake of the people's peace, even if it's dangerous. Instead, they mock her and tell her to just get married, especially after reminding her of Princess Wisteria, who vanished in battle. Serafina holds back her anger and walks away. Inside the carriage, Serafina feels miserable hearing the nobles feasting while her people are starving due to ongoing crop failures. Suddenly, she sees citizens attacking a potato merchant. Serafina immediately gets down to confront the starving citizens with her sword. Even though they are threatened, the hopeless citizens charge forward anyway. Serafina takes her stance to face them. Instead of punishing them, Serafina gives them her gemstone necklace so they can buy food. Deeply moved, the citizens promise never to steal again. Gazing at the sky, she vows to conquer the eastern region as soon as possible so her people can live well and stop suffering. Before leaving, Serafina prays in front of a painting of Princess Wisteria. Suddenly, Her brother arrives and starts asking about a potential husband again. Her brother keeps insulting her, telling her to stop being a knight and get married. He dismisses her swordsmanship as nothing more than play acting. Suddenly, the atmosphere turns grim as her brother transforms into a giant monster, forcing Serafina to be his wife. It turns out to be just a nightmare. When she wakes up, Serafina is shocked to find herself in a wooden hut, hearing loud snoring next to her bed. As she turns her head, she is even more shocked to see a muscular barbarian man sleeping on his back right next to her, with their legs accidentally touching. Sira is having a nightmare about the barbarian king forcing her to become his wife. When she suddenly wakes up in an unfamiliar room, she looks both shocked and deeply confused by her surroundings. While clutching her forehead and trying to calm her breathing, Sira notices a man sleeping on the floor nearby. To her horror, it turns out to be the same barbarian king who just appeared in her dream. Sira breaks into a cold sweat as she sees the man sleeping soundly with his mouth wide open. She never expected to wake up in the same wooden house as her enemy. The man eventually wakes up and starts laughing while still shirtless. Panicking at the sight, Sira points at him with trembling hands and demands to know why she is there. The barbarian king remains completely casual since he is in his own room. He is actually puzzled as to why Sira is making such a loud fuss so early in the morning. Sira becomes even more emotional, questioning why she is in a room with a naked man. The king's nonchalant reaction casually picking his ear only makes Sira misunderstand the situation further. Holding her forehead in distress, Sira starts imagining the worst about what happened last night. She immediately accuses the barbarian king of acting crudely and breaking his promise from the day before. Sira continues to scream, calling the barbarian king a beast for his perceived actions. She begins to fear her fate as a prisoner who might end up pregnant with her enemy's child. Through her tears, Sira points a large sword at him and begs to be killed to preserve her honor, instead of fighting back. The barbarian king simply flicks her forehead to snap her out of her delusions. Sira eventually prostrates herself on the floor, weeping because she feels she has discarded her pride as a knight. She is deeply ashamed for losing her composure and nearly attacking an unarmed opponent. The barbarian king can only stare in disbelief at Sira, who seems ready to die over a mere matter of pride. To him, her noble way of thinking is unnecessarily complicated. Suddenly, a black-haired girl arrives at the room carrying a stack of dry clothes. She mentions that Sira is lucky to have woken up without suffering any lasting side effects. A flashback reveals that Sira had been vomiting and fainted while in her cell. It turns out she had overdosed on sleeping pills when she was captured on the battlefield yesterday. Sira finally realizes that what happened last night was not anything indecent. She was simply brought to the room for her own safety after losing consciousness. It turns out she was given a type of paralyzing toxin to help stop her internal bleeding. Sira is instantly mortified for the misunderstanding and for causing such a scene. As he begins to put his clothes back on, the barbarian king assures her that he did not touch her at all. He does not want his future wife to die a pathetic death before they are officially married. Laughing at her reaction, the barbarian king takes his leave to go and prepare breakfast. He knows that Sira must be starving after being unconscious for an entire day. Sira is left alone in the room to finally compose herself. She still finds it hard to believe that she now has to rely on these people she once considered barbarians. Sira recalls her grandfather, who once told her that her natural talent for the sword was far too great. He had hoped she could find happiness if only she weren't a knight. The memory lingers in her mind as she sits there alone in thought. Now, Syrah must face a new reality that is completely beyond her original expectations. 6:16, 6:19, 6:40, 6:45, 7 o'clock, 7:04, 7:31, 7:36, 7:54, 7:59, 8:18, 8:23, 8:57, 9:03, 9:26 and 9:30, 9:55, 9:59, Part 3, EP2_Part3.mp4. Vior explains that every place has its own rules. Then he starts teasing Serafina about whether she's scared to live there. While getting ready, Serafina stays curt and makes it clear that she doesn't fully trust Vior and his group yet. Trusting his instincts, Vior is sure that Serafina will love the area once they step out of the wooden hut. Serafina is amazed by the lush scenery, from the thick forests to the wide view of the bay. To Serafina, the place is much greener than she expected, a big change from the barren battlefields she usually visits. During the journey, they see various wildlife and flying dragons that the locals just see as ordinary animals. Serafina gets more annoyed as she is teased about how she's starting to get used to the local food and environment. The sound of rushing water leads them to a massive waterfall, something Serafina has never seen in her homeland. Suddenly, Vior takes off his cloak and tells Serafina to undress too, which makes her scream in shock. It turns out they just want to bathe together. Serafina thinks it's improper, but for the locals, it's a common custom. Hachitane tells Serafina she's starting to smell, and they eventually soak in the clear river wrapped in towels. While washing her hair, Hachitane explains she's staying with Serafina to keep her safe from any dangers in the water. Afraid of being surrounded by water monsters, Serafina runs from the river before she can even put her clothes back on. While feeling lost without her clothes, Serafina suddenly senses someone watching her from the bushes near the river bank. Serafina briefly fears the worst, but the figure appearing is just a handsome young man with white hair. Serafina is stunned by the man's face as he stands there shirtless, staring back at her with a surprised look. Serafina feels increasingly embarrassed because a shirtless Vior keeps staring at her. Vior, however, acts perfectly casual and whistles as if nothing is wrong. While they chat, Vior mentions that his mother was once a knight from the west who was surprised to see so many wild animals in this forest. Wrapped only in a white towel, Serafina starts to feel the cold. Noticing this, Vior immediately tosses his black cloth over to cover her. Vior tells Serafina to use his cloak for now. He suggests they head back to where her clothes are kept right away so she doesn't get sick. Serafina is briefly impressed by his polite manners, which are very different from the version of the bearded Vior she once thought was strange. When Serafina's face turns red, Vior reflexively checks her temperature by placing his hand on her forehead. Serafina panics because she is rarely this close to a man. Vior is worried that Serafina might have trouble getting down the mountain if she's feeling weak. He asks for permission to touch her so he can help. Without hesitation, Vior carries Serafina bridal style. Shortly after, they run into a little girl who has been looking for them. The girl is confused by the vibe between them. At that moment, Serafina finally realizes that the man carrying her is indeed Vior. Vior admits that he did shave off his beard. He laughs at Serafina's reaction, finding her innocent and very easy to fluster. Vior's cheek has a red mark from Serafina's slap, but he just laughs. To him, Serafina is a remarkable woman he has set his sights on. On the way home, Serafina continues to grumble in annoyance. In reality, Vior had been patrolling the river area to make sure no monsters approached. Vior intentionally kept his distance while Serafina was bathing because he knew she would be uncomfortable if anyone else was nearby. Even though there is a dragon roaming near the stream, Vior reassures her that the beast is actually quite timid and not a threat. Vior keeps teasing her until Serafina's face turns red again. Eventually, Serafina relents and forgives the incident because the scenery there was indeed beautiful. Vior feels happy because it turns out his future wife has an understanding side, even if her attitude can be fierce and difficult to manage at times. While walking through the forest, Serafina secretly admits to herself that Vior's face actually looks quite good without the beard. A few days later, the atmosphere in their log cabin has returned to normal. Vior, with his beard grown back, looks serious as he wipes his sword while deep in thought.